Hello everyone, my name is Jen and welcome to the Book Refuge and welcome to Outlander Season 6, Episode 2, Allegiance. This is my recap and breakdown of the episode from the point of view of a book reader who is totally in love with it. Thank you so much for joining me last week. If you did, if this is the first one you found, definitely check out my playlist that is all about Season 6 of Outlander. I also have a playlist for Season 5 and a playlist with all my general videos about Outlander because at this point I've made upwards of 50 of them. And yeah, let's dive right in. Last time I took too long futzing around, and I'm very excited to talk about this episode. I want to say again at the top of it before diving in that I am focused on comparing and contrasting the content of the show with the content of the book to the best of my ability. I mean, obviously I'll forget some things, and you guys are always very gracious in my comments section. I am more than happy to have a discussion or a debate or any of that jazz in my comments. Just make sure we keep it friendly. Nobody's opinions are the exact right opinions, so let's just remember that when we're chatting. This is another episode that I feel like 90% of the content in the episode is in the books somewhere. I shared this last week that, because the timeline and things are so diverged at this point, we're not really so much going through book by book at this point. But what I'm really looking for is content and character moments that are very comparable with the book. And a podcast and breakdown that I really, really enjoy, which they're actually what inspired me to be doing my own reviews, is Outlander Cast with Mary and Blake. I have been listening to their podcast for years, literally since season 2 started is when I started listening to them. And I loved them because I loved the idea of Mary being a book reader and Blake being a show watcher, and he didn't have any context before. But one of the things that always, will piss me off about it, I love it dearly, I absolutely do, is that Blake is very much, one of his commandments is the book and the show is the show. And I completely understand his point of view for it. And I do love that after all these years, he's really stuck to that, where he's like, when we see things happening in the show, the motivation of the character, it's not about whether it matches the motivation of the book character, is what's in the show, does it support what they are doing, the character that they have built. And I agree with that completely when just watching the show. But I really wanted a space, I wanted an arena where I could talk about the things that weren't matching up or how things compared to the book. And that's why I started doing my own reviews, because as much as I love their breakdown of the episodes, whenever someone points out a book thing, he's like, but that's in the book, it's not in the show. And he's not wrong. That is the formula that they're going with. And I just said I wasn't going to take forever at the beginning of the episode, and there I went. But that's just to, again, realign what the purpose of my episode breakdowns are. And again, you guys have all been super supportive of that. That's where a lot of my fans of these breakdowns come from, is you're also looking for that, because most places reviewing it, they're comparing it to itself. So anyway, again, my point being, I think a lot of the content is coming from that. The other big reason, though, that I bring it up is because the things to do with Claire and the ether, which of course we're going to talk about in here, I really liked what Blake's perspective on why they're going this route was, and I actually quite agreed with it. I did agree with what he was saying. That's just not the angle that I'm coming at it from. I don't see book Claire turning to ether that way, but his point of view about do I believe that the stuff that Claire has been through in the show, that she would turn to ether. And they brought up the point that there used to be a joke back in the very beginning of the show that she would get Sassenach wasted whenever things weren't, going their way. Remember the wedding, remember at the gathering, these different times where to deal with her stress, she would get shit-faced. And so there is that, kind of built into her. But anyway, I'm getting off on sidetracks already, but that's why you're here with me. Also, my libations today, I have wine instead of whiskey, mostly because I'm filming this before noon today, and I just decided I wanted a lighter floaty thing. I have some other events going on YouTube today, and so I don't want to get too knackered too early in the day. So we're keeping it with a nice 11% Moscato here. That's the plan. It's a peach Moscato. Loving it. Okay. So this episode, before the credits, before the intro song, we begin with Jamie and Ian rolling up to the Cherokee camp. They're kind of, Native American settlement there, and they're having gun negotiations. And Jamie, we find out, is very reserved about promising the Native Americans anything because he doesn't know which side of the war they're going to end up on. And later on, we find out when he talks to Claire that, like, she isn't sure either. American history wasn't what she, that isn't what she studied because, she grew up in Britain, in England. And so, Jamie has his talks with them, and he isn't, quite sure whether he should try to negotiate with the king for that or placate them. Is he going to be arming people who are going to then turn those guns on him when he switches to the revolutionary side? We just don't know. Also, Jamie isn't sure the king would be too likely to do that anyway. So that's what we have before the titles. Then when we come back from the titles, we have Claire checking on the, stitches in Tom's hand. She's telling him that he should have the surgery. And he's like, I've prayed about it and I don't think that I should. And we have this little back and forth between Tom and Claire where he quotes the Bible to her. And she says back, she's like, that kind of shows, when a man doesn't know how to argue, that he quotes scripture that a woman should be quiet because he doesn't have a good argument. And then we have Malva there giving her little quips. And this is a moment that is very true to the book. I used to love when I was reading the book when, like, Tom has this very idea of, like, what a woman should be like. And it's so much the opposite of how Jamie treats his wife and of how he values her opinion and is, kind of stunned by her mind at so many different points in their life. But Claire, she doesn't get super offended by this. She's kind of used to people saying that to her. But Tom is very sure that he doesn't want to have this surgery. So she's like, okay, well, we can't do it until your other hand is healed anyway, or you won't be able to use either hand. So she leaves. Then we have Claire talking with Alan and Malva, and we see Alan being kind of shady AF, kind of bossing Malva around. Malva, is showing more interest in healing with Claire, and Claire is like, my daughter-in-law, Marcelly, is about to have a baby. If you want to come, to like a checkup with me with her, you could, and, you could help in that way. And Alan is like, she has a lot of chores to do. And so we see this like tension between these siblings. Then we have a scene that is totally from the book and just seriously made me like laugh so much. Although it was like super awkward. I had to mute it. Do you ever do that when you get like secondhand embarrassment? Maybe it's just me. If I wasn't reviewing this, I would have just like skipped ahead like a minute, but since I'm reviewing it, I like muted it so I didn't have to like listen to it. But this is a scene directly from the book where, because he's an Indian agent, as like a gift, or to honor him, a couple of young Native women are sent, or they decide to. It's not really clear in the episode. I believe in the books, it's just kind of like expected that some women would be sent to comfort him. They're sent into the longhouse or the tent or wherever the dwelling is that Ian and Jamie wakes up to these women taking their clothes off and touching him. And obviously he doesn't want to offend them, but also he can't speak directly to them. These women don't speak English. And so he's like, Ian, will you please like talk to these women? And so he kind of like, negotiates with him. And then, the women end up leaving after this back and forth. And Jamie's just like, you need to stifle your glee. And Ian's like, nothing. The only thing that we did a little different, it's a good thing that they did. In the books, I believe like Ian is like, y'all can come over to my blanket. And Ian takes care of the ladies instead of Jamie. But it gets Jamie a little bit wound up for a scene we're going to see in a little bit. So now we are with Claire and Marcelly, and the children are not being great. Fergus is not around. Malva does show up, but she quickly needs to end up taking care of the children because Fergus isn't there. Claire notices more bruising on Marcelly, and now we're finding out a little bit more about what's going on. Granted, it's never okay for domestic abuse, and some people can decide whether they believe Marcelly or not. However, this is the same thing that Marcelly says in the book, is that this big bruise on her wrist is from, she goes after Fergus because she's so upset. So she throws something at him or is going to hit him with something, and he grabs her, and it leaves a pretty big bruise behind. Now, people can debate whether they think she's telling the truth about that. I tend to agree with what she's saying. She's pretty embarrassed about it. She knows it doesn't look good. So I think that's part of why it looks a little shady. But to me, that does line up. Like, Fergus isn't randomly grabbing her to hurt her. He's feeling very ashamed. He's coming home drunk. And we saw in the last scene, like, she was pretty angry, you know, and she says, like, I have my mother's temper. And when he's so drunk all the time and, like, I get so frustrated, like, I 100% believe that Marcelly would not let her husband treat her badly. And that's kind of how it came out, like, in the book, too, is that she would be so pissed at him, she would, like, throw something, you know, so he'd be defending himself. Again, not a great reason to put your hand on someone, but if your wife is going to brain you with a pot or with something, I think you might grab her to stop her from hitting you. That does not make things rosy. That does not mean, like, oh, we can just forgive Fergus. No, that's not what any of that means. I just think it makes it more complex and another layer to, like, it's not even a straight answer. You know, it's not even him being abusive in the sense of, like, taking his feelings out on her, because that's a clearer answer. You know, Marcelly, you know, I shared this last week. Marcelly had shared with Bree in a previous season of, like, she had seen her mother be abused, and she knows that she would never let that happen to her and her children. And I believe that. I believe that Marcelly would not stay around Fergus if he was a danger to her and her bairns. I don't believe it. No matter how much she loves him, I don't think she would. I think she is heartbroken and that she feels guilty of what happened to her. And we also hear her say, like, he's ashamed. He thinks he should have been there with us, or that I shouldn't have had to be the one. And Claire is like, but that's crazy. You know, like, how would it have been different? And she's like, you know, he already struggles with his pride, only having one hand. And then to have the love of your life, you know, almost lose your baby, that's horrible, you know, and we're going to see that escalate still. Things are not out of the woods for Fergus yet, but I think that now we are kind of fully assessing what's going on with him, that there will be room for someone to, you know, speak to him. So then, though, we have Marcelly bringing up what happened to them sends Claire into kind of another panic attack. So we do have her now. Now, this isn't the middle of the night where she can't sleep. This is her actively having a panic attack and making her way home and choosing to do either just in the middle of the day. So we're seeing an escalation in these symptoms. So then we get a cute little look at Bree and Roger in their cabin, and she has just received her gift from Lord John. I'm so glad we're doing this. You know how last week she was kind of like, I'm afraid to make anything because it might change things. And Claire was like, we're going to do what we need to do to make things better. And so she has gotten some white phosphorus from Lord John, which is a very, like, flammable substance. When it is exposed to air, it bursts into flame. And so Roger's like, okay. She's like, don't worry, I'll work on it outside. And she's going to make matches, which I just love. I know that's such, like, a small piece, but I love that they are giving Bree something to do. We'll definitely talk more about her later. I still, like, feel kind of awkward between them, but something, I also heard this on Outlander cast, because again, I don't do a ton of research between the seasons because I don't want to know so much about how the sausage is made. Like, it's not a thing that I, like, really want to know. But I guess, like, Sam and Kat, as producers, as well as other producers, they've hired a intimacy coach for this year to really kind of help build connection between characters. And it was mentioned by Mary and Blake that, you know, we really are kind of seeing that more between Bree and Roger, of how they've kind of coached them to be more comfortable around each other, you know? And I think that we can really see that. You know, I was feeling it too. They're feeling slowly more like the couple I want them to. Even if I still think that Sophie Skelton's acting is just a little bit awkward sometimes. But I really love the moments that we're getting with the two of them. And so we have that. Then we find out that Hiram Crombie's mother-in-law, Mrs. Wilson, has died. And the Fisher folk and Tom, they've been putting up the church. It's not fully finished yet, but they asked Roger if he would speak at her funeral. And Roger, you know, kind of agrees. There's a little bit of, you know, chatting back and forth where Bree's like, oh, well, hopefully you don't have to do it all the time. And he's like, yeah, I've been to enough that my dad had done, you know, the Reverend, his adopted father. He could do the blessing for a funeral, and that's going to be good. And I'm very excited to see that happening. There's more we'll talk about of the progression of Roger, but I really love seeing him slowly. He's coming to that realization, right, that this could be something that he's meant to do. And we'll talk about it at the end of this episode. But in the sneak peek for next week, which is going to have one of my favorite scenes from the book, we're going to see Roger come into that even more. So we have Jamie coming back from being the Native American agent, and he is a little bit horny for his lady. And so we have a bit of a rough and tumble in their room, and it's just some of those intimate moments with their saucy like dialogue back and forth. Like, I have said this in a lot of my reviews of the books. I love how consistently, like, horny is a very crude word to say for it, but how passionate and physical and content Jamie and Claire are with each other. And for the most part, you know, obviously there's different things that happen to them throughout the book series, but like, they are each other's center. And one of the ways they can always reset when things are tough is to be intimate with each other, because it brings them back to literally their most base form with each other. And so there's some really sweet banter back and forth, and I love when Jamie's like, I literally want to take you again. And that's one of the downsides of growing older, is that the spirit is always willing, even if the body needs a nap. And I just love that so much. And he's kind of like, you know, it's probably a good thing. Otherwise, I would literally have my cock in you all the time. And I'm like, oh, the king of men right there, okay? The king of men right there. Love it. So then we have, this is where I believe Jamie is asking Claire about which side the natives fight on, and he doesn't have, or she doesn't have a great answer. You know, they have fought on both sides at different times in different tribes with different sides. Like, we just don't know. So that's something that is up in the air at this point, what we're going to do. I just circled this in my notes. Something that I also love very much is Claire is affirming who Jamie is. And she says to him basically that whatever the decision is, however this comes out, you are the man for this job. You are going to do this with more care and thoughtfulness than Brown could ever do. And I'm very glad that you took this position, because you're going to do the best that you can. And I just love that. I love when a husband and a wife affirm each other. I mean, I love when anyone does it. Words of affirmation are one of my love languages. But I especially love seeing Claire do that for her husband, and just to reassure him that you are always trying to do your best. And I mean, we all need to hear that. We all need to hear that. So then we have Major McDonald showing up, and I love that we get to see him. Like, he really is one of my favorite redcoats to have show up, because, for the most part, he's a very good-spirited, kind man, as much as, we can say that about the British soldiers. He really is. And Jamie doesn't put forward the ask at this point. And we also see Major McDonald have an allergic reaction to ADSO, which was adorable. All right, so then we have another wonderful book scene, which again involves Roger. It makes me very happy. This scene I thought was done very powerfully. So we go to the church structure, which is not complete. There's not even any seats. Roger is presiding over what appears to be the dead body of Mrs. Wilson. She has the food and drink beside her for the sin eater. This was a custom that was done where when someone died, you would pay someone to come in and eat the sins of the person who died so that they'd be able to get, into heaven with, clean hands or whatever. And so Roger is saying his, blessing over her, and Germain notices that she's breathing. And Claire, runs over and is like, oh my gosh. And of course, Tom, Christy, and some of the other people in the room are like, what witchcraft is this? And Claire goes over and, checks her, and she realizes that it was some kind of a artery hemorrhage. And for some reason, I believe in the book that it's for some reason it had gotten crimped, but now it's loose. And so she will be dying in minutes anyway. And so Roger kind of uses this as a moment where he's like, you stand before God, Mrs. Wilson. Is there anything that you would anything you'd like to say? And she was like, he was like, you stand before God. And she's like, so do you. And he's like, I'm afraid you're a little bit closer than me. So the Sin Eater comes in. She is chewing out Hiram for not giving her a better funeral and all these things. And then the Sin Eater comes in, eats it. Hiram pays him. And then Mrs. Wilson is like, I forgive you, Hiram. You were a good lad. Have my blessing. And then she dies for real. And it's very it's very emotional, even though it's comical at the same time. But I remember it being in the book, it's definitely pretty funny how it's lays out, but it also is really powerful because it is kind of that one last chance to say that you love the person. I mean, I definitely would not have liked that if it happened at my grandma's funeral, but I feel after someone has died, there are so many thoughts that come up, and any regrets or things you wish you'd said to them. And my grandma, we couldn't talk to her for the last few days. Sorry, I'm not going to go down this road and make this sad. But to have that, last moment to just hold the person and say you love them after you've already been, grieving them, I think is such a powerful moment, even though part of it is funny or whatever. So Roger now gets to give this blessing over her, and he has such dignity in it. And you guys, maybe you don't know, but I'm a huge stan of Roger in the books. Show has not done Roger well. He just hasn't been given the chance, and I'm so glad we're getting to see those little pieces come through, because overall Roger was fantastic in this episode. He's not stepping his foot in it every 5 seconds like they had him do in previous seasons. So he really gives a good message that we see, giving Mrs. Wilson her final goodbye. So then we are sitting at dinner, and Bree says she has something to share. Immediately, Lizzie and Mrs. Bug, they all think that she's pregnant, and everyone's getting excited, and Bree's like, no. Now this isn't going to be as fun because you think I was going to have a baby. And she shares her matches, which Claire thinks is pretty cool, and Roger's pretty proud of her. But they're like, oh, I've never had trouble starting a fire before. And I'm like, excuse me, how cool is it that literally she can just magically start a fire wherever you are? And Jamie's like, that is pretty cool. You'd be able to make it wherever you go. People are not understanding how great it is. And so it kind of takes the stuffing out of Bree right there. Then, while we're still at the table, we talk about Roger is maybe going to be preaching at the church for the interim until the Christies are able to get a minister there. And Claire is not allowed to come to the church because she's seen as a witch after what she did. And I can't remember who said, just like, does that bother you? And Claire's like, people are always going to think I'm a witch when I'm able to do these things. Like, it's literally been happening to me the entire time I've been in the past, because people love you when you're able to save someone. But when you're not, or you do something that they don't understand, that's what they're always going to jump to. They're always going to jump to the witchcraft card. Jamie shows a bit of interest in having Roger be the preacher, because he says something that, like, in the hands of the wrong man, a pulpit can lead to war. And he's very aware that having Tom Christie preaching wouldn't be great. So we see that kind of stirring in his head. Then we have Marcelly going into labor, and so we have some things happen very quickly, and we're starting a plot line that in equal measure breaks my heart and makes me happy. Like, it is an equal measure type thing. So Marcelly goes into labor and we can't find Fergus. So Roger goes to get Fergus, who is drunk, but Roger really, like, speaks to me. He's like, you need to be there. There's going to come a time in your child's life where you look at them and you hate yourself for not having been there. Obviously a parallel to, he didn't get to be there for the birth of Jemmy. And that's something that eats at him. And so he tells him, he's like, you need to be the man that she needs you to be, you know, whatever that is, pretend if you have to. And so we go back, and Marcelly is feeling very uncomfortable. Claire's trying what she can to get the labor moving. We can see Adso is like cuddling with Marcelly, which just makes me happy. I love that we're showing Adso a little more. Even though it very much looked like the actress who plays Marcelly, I forgot her name for a second, it was like holding this cat in place. Marcelly wants to write to her mother. I'm gonna cry. And Claire's like, sweetie, I'm gonna do everything I can. You are going to be okay. And she's like, I know, but I still want to write to my mom. And then we have Fergus come in. And instantly Marcelly is just so happy to have her husband there. And Fergus, this is right out of the books, he starts doing some things he learned in the brothel. So stimulating the her breasts and her nipples, getting like things happening. And so much so that everybody else kind of leaves the room, kind of leaves them to it. But we really get to see Fergus say, like, you always think you're gonna die, my sweet, and you're going to make it. Like, it's going to be okay. And so he's there for her, and they start doing it, which this is directly from the book, because he apparently has done this with some of their other children too. So then we're all kind of like awkwardly listening to this happen, and so Bree goes out to the barn to kind of like go for a walk. And her and Ian are talking. And Ian, you know, he does know that Bree and Roger and Claire are travelers. And so he's asking Bree some questions about the natives and what happens to the Native Americans. And, you know, Bree tells him that things aren't going to go well. You know, that it's going to be the United States, but the Native Americans will never like really have a home there. And man, that's like really like chilling to hear. And Ian is really feeling that he wants to do what he can, because maybe we could change that if we, you know, if we do our best by them, if we arm them to our best abilities. So then we go back inside, and Henri Christian is born, and he is a dwarf. He is a small baby, and when Fergus sees him, he is very shocked, and he gives him back to Claire and runs out. And then Claire gives the baby to Marcelly and is like, he's a dwarf, but he is perfectly healthy. There's nothing wrong with him, and he's your baby. And Marcelly is bonding with him, and it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. I think that actress does such a good job And those of us who are book lovers, we know the path that Henri Christian has is not an easy one, but he definitely is a beautiful little soul, so full of life of what we'll get to see of him. And I'm just so happy that he's here, and I'm so happy that the show had him come, and like excited to see this storyline is an interesting term of words because it is very difficult, but it's very powerful in my opinion. So yeah. Then we get to see Roger and Bree again talking about how like disappointed she was that no one was excited about her matches, and she's like, apparently the only good thing I can do here is get pregnant. And Roger's like, are you upset about that, or are you upset that we've been trying for a baby and we haven't been able to have one? So that is, you know, just something for us to keep in mind, that these two are like actively, purposefully trying to have a baby this time around, right? So then we have Aidan McCallum shows up. He had gotten lost, and so Roger's going to take him home. And I'm really just liking how great Roger and Bree like are with him. Like they're so kind and friendly to him, and I really hope the show continues to take the path that like Bree and Roger are very united, because there will be some interesting things that are going to happen with Roger. And not that there won't be conflict, but for me in the books, like there is conflict in that relationship, but it always is like they're always together with it, even though there are things to discuss and things like that. And I'm just so happy to see them on the same page that I want it to stay that way, even, you know, if and when other things come up. So we'll see. So then we have another moment with Kezzy and Lizzie. There's like flirting with that. Okay, we'll see how that goes. And then we have Bird, Chief Bird of the Cherokee show up, and he's not pleased that Jaime said he won't be recommending that the king give him weapons. And Bird is like, we're not pleased about this. And then they leave right away. And Ian kind of tells him like, why won't we give them a chance to protect themselves? You know, there could be a chance to change history here. Why are we just assuming that it has to go this way? Fair question. So then we have Jaime go to speak with Tom Christie because the church is almost done. The steeple is going up, and Jaime is reminding Tom that we're not at the prison anymore. In the prison, we took oaths. We became Freemasons. And Tom is a little bit taken back where he's like, yeah, I know. And he's like, so this needs to be a meeting house where all religions and all people are welcome. And we don't have one person's religion at the head. And Jaime does his badass motherfucker voice where he's like, and I will be clear, everyone will be welcome in this building, including my wife. And if I hear any more talk that my wife is be called a witch, we're going to have issues. And I'm really glad that he laid that down, because I know from what I can see, like I know Jaime is still trying to figure this out. I think we forget, Jaime is a master chess player, you know, like chess is his game in a lot of ways. That doesn't mean he isn't rash sometimes and charges into things without thinking. But when he can, when he has the time, when his temper isn't fully peaked, he likes to think things through. And so I really appreciate when he knows when to press and when to observe. And this was a case where he's like, I'm laying this down. You know, like, I gave you a place to be here and this land and the opportunity this affords. But like, you don't just get to come in and make this whatever you want. Like, that's not what's happening. So he's like, there's not going to be one delineation or any of that. And then we see Tom have a bit of a rage here. And this is a scene in the book that I've seen referenced. Like, I believe that, I can't remember if Claire observes this happening or if Malva tells her about it, or if Tom tells Claire about it at a different point. I don't remember, but this definitely is a book accurate thing where Tom comes in and like the milk is spoiled. He's just looking for a reason to beat Malva, and it seems very fucked up. Like, it is on its face value. All of this is very fucked up. That he is like, I don't want you spending time with her. And she's like, I didn't do anything. It always is like so crazy to me too, because it's like, do people literally not believe in medicine at all? That there's no forms of medicine? Because like, there was still doctors and healers. I don't know. It's because Claire's a woman. We know why. It's because she's a woman. Vagina apparently means you don't know shit, but whatever. So Tom is angry at her and he's going to beat her. So he makes her bend over and pull up her skirts, and he takes his belt off. But because of his hands, he can't beat her. So she turns around and she gives him the stink eye, and he's like, take that look off your face. And she smirks at him. And we see that bit of rebellion that's in Malva. And I'm glad to see it, no matter what this twisted fuckery that the Christies are going to be or how this is going to play out in the show. I like that we're seeing the different layers to Malva. She's not the innocent that we see. She's not necessarily a harlot. She's not that, like, there is many, many layers to this situation. And I'm appreciating how it's coming up. So then we see Tom go talk to Claire and say that his hand is keeping him from writing, and he's prayed about it and would like the surgery. And it is a very interesting context to have, like, the reason he needs his hand fixed is because he's not able to properly beat his daughter is just so messed up. I'm just like, wow. And Claire's like, well, I can't do it until your other hand is healed, but we will talk about it when that is. So then we get to see Jamie is coming to visit Marcelly, and Ian is actually over there, and he's holding Henri Christian and just holding him, and he says, like, that he had a child, and that's just kind of left there. And Marcelly is like, you did? Because, you know, none of them here have known this yet, you know, and Jamie's overhearing this, and Ian tells her, you know, because Fergus has been, from what we can see, like, he hasn't been around since the baby's been born. And Ian tells her, he's like, your husband is grieving. And I know that can be taken like, the child isn't dead. Like, Henri Christian is here. He's not the specifications that they're used to in a baby. But he's here, you know? And we don't know what happened to Ian's son, child, daughter. We don't know anything about them. But Ian knows that when things don't go right, there's always some responsibility and grieving that you feel. Whether or not that's the end of the world, that doesn't mean you don't feel pain for it, you know? So then, really the last scene we see of this is that Jamie goes to talk to Claire. Well, no, that's not what happens. Jamie is writing a letter, and Claire comes downstairs, and she's like, who are you writing? And he's like, I'm writing the governor, and I'm going to petition that we get weapons for the Native Americans. And she's like, what changed your mind? And he says, like, I overheard Ian saying that he had a child, and I realized that the Cherokee are always going to feel like Ian's people, and he has allegiances with them. And Jamie says, and I have allegiances to him. So come what may, this is what we're going to do. So there we are with that. That was the episode. It was a great one, in my opinion. I really like the progression of the stories we're seeing. There was quite a few, as I said, quite a few book scenes that I very much enjoy. There wasn't much that wasn't book accurate in this one, again, so I'm feeling it. I'm really feeling it with this season. I'm trying not to get too excited, because obviously there is still this, like, for me, kind of this, like, looming uncertainty about what's happening with the Claire situation, right? But I'm still feeling pretty good about where this is going. I really enjoyed it. So, any, like, final comments that I can think of with this? I don't really think so. As I said, I liked the clip that we saw, you know, the preview of next week, where there is a baby flowing down the river in a basket and Roger chasing after. I believe that's going to lead to one of my top scenes that I wanted to see. So very, very ready for that to happen. Very ready. yeah, it was another excellent episode. So thank you so much for coming to my recap of episode 2 of season 6 of Outlander, Allegiance. Let me know what your favorite moments are, if there's anything that I missed that you wanted to point at, anything you want to gush about, I'd love to hear it. Remember to keep things kind in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye!